Hi, I'm Mai Chettiar, the Federal Director of the Justice Action Network. And on today's installment of Unconventional, we will be speaking with Congressman David Trone from Maryland, my home state. Congressman Trone just won his re-election bid in Maryland's 6th Congressional District. Congratulations. Prior to his election in 2018, he was a successful entrepreneur as the founder and co-owner of Total Wine and More. He brings a unique business perspective to Capitol Hill when it comes to the issue of criminal justice reform. Congressman Trone has been a strong champion for mental health and substance abuse services. He's forged many bipartisan efforts on the issue of criminal justice reform, including introducing bills with Representatives Kelly Armstrong of North Dakota and Guy Reschenthaler of Pennsylvania. Congressman, thank you so much for being here today.
It's great to be here today, and we appreciate all your work in this area.
So I wanted to talk to you about a few of your criminal justice efforts. So I know that a few of your efforts have focused on addressing the opioid crisis in particular, and this has been a deeply personal issue for you. And you formed the Freshman Working Group on Addiction with members from both parties. In our episode with Representative Armstrong, he spoke very highly of your leadership in this group. Can you tell us more about it and what its goals are and what progress that it's made?
Well, frankly, I think what's happening with the opioid crisis in America and the addiction crisis, it's the most important issue in the country, but it's become eclipsed by COVID, of course. But once we find that vaccine for COVID and we've been able to go through the country, this will then rise to the top again, addiction as the most important issue, because there will never be a vaccine. And of course, it's connected right with mental health and right with criminal justice reform. There are three legs on the same stool. So we've got to address all three pieces together. But as Kelly probably mentioned, I lost my nephew, Ian, at age 24 to a fentanyl overdose in 2016. And I had worked for over 5 years with him directly to try and help him through arrests, mental health challenges, all the issue with addiction. And so really got into the nitty gritty. So right away, I formed the Freshman Working Group. I talked about it relentlessly during the campaign. We have 65 members from 32 states, completely bipartisan. And we're trying to bring a fresh perspective, fresh eyes, and we've introduced over 50 bills on mental health and addiction. Just this week, we had two bills. One passed the floor yesterday unanimously, $9 billion state opioid response grants, and one's going to pass the floor today on fentanyl, on how we monitor and strengthen the control of fentanyl coming in from China and now via Mexico. Then, of course, I've been appointed on the commission by Speaker Pelosi to drive the fentanyl and synthetics to try and work with Mexican and Chinese governments so we can stop that flow coming into our country.
Yeah, that's great. I wanted to talk to you about the bills that you mentioned. So you're the lead sponsor of the Family Support Services for Addiction Act, which passed the House in October. And you're also the lead sponsor for the State Opioid Response Grant Authorization Act, along with Representative Armstrong and others, which passed the House yesterday, as you mentioned. Can you tell us more about those bills and what they would do and why they're at the top of your agenda?
Well, the State Opioid Response Grant's the first bill we wrote, and we were able to get great bipartisan support. And then as you mentioned, it passed unanimously yesterday at the House, and we have co-sponsors in the Senate. Right now, we're working to hotline it through the Senate. And it takes $9 billion and for 6 years. And we want to have an authorization that says we're going to have consistent funding. You know, the money goes to the states. They then pass it out in the grants. But the states will know where to put the dollars. The Fed will just screw it up. So we've got to, count on our state leaders to do that. And so it helps on community treatment centers. It can help in a whole raft of funding different areas. Now, the other bill, the Family Support Services Act, I did with Dan Muser, Republican out of Scranton. And that's a targeted around the families, because I found that even though we have a lot of contacts and means, when I was trying to help Ian, I struggled as to how to turn, where to find the best 28-day program, what to do with the fact that he'd been arrested 5 times and how to work through those situations, the justice impact, how to find a job when you have a record, how you find housing, how you find mental health, and how they all come in together. So the Family Support Services Act is aimed not at the individual, but at the family, all around them. And so it's providing grants, again, to the states to give to different local organizations that support the families of those that are in crisis. Again, bipartisan, and we're working to hotline that right now through the Senate. And we have excellent bipartisan support in the Senate also.
Yeah, that's terrific. I mean, criminal justice reform and this idea of addressing addiction and mental health is one of the very few areas where there is really strong bipartisan support to move through legislation. So yeah, that all of that sounds really promising, and we'll do what we can to help with those bills to get across the finish line. So staying on the topic of mental health, back in May, you wrote a really excellent op-ed in The Hill about our nation's mental health crisis and how the pandemic exacerbates that crisis. So what kind of steps need to be taken specifically to address the mental health crisis and the drug addiction crisis that ends up landing people in prisons and jails? And if you could just talk a little bit about how people who are struggling with addiction and mental health issues do often end up in the justice system, and that is, precisely the wrong place for them to be, and how they need the types of support and services that you've mentioned are in the pieces of legislation that you discussed.
Yeah, we got to first start with, addiction is a disease, it is not a crime, and addiction runs 70-some%, with mental health challenges. And I saw back early in COVID that this COVID crisis was going to lead to exacerbate 2 more crises: addiction. My numbers in Western Maryland are up over 52% in overdose deaths year to date. That's on top of last year's 71,000 record overdose deaths, 52% up. It's unbelievable. Then on top of that, we have the mental health crisis, which we knew the isolation and the anxiety of COVID. We were on a caucus call yesterday with President-elect Biden's chief COVID leader, who was awesome. And he talked a lot about what's happening, and they're seeing a 4-fold increase in depression, a 300% increase in anxiety, and a 200% increase in people considering suicide. So we've got an unbelievable mental health crisis that already existed. And I was working on that, and we had a number of ideas and worked with Senator Stabenow over on the other side of the Congress. But this is a major issue that just went exponential. So it's going to be with us for decades or more. And especially we're concerned about what it's done to our kids, our children who've been isolated, and of course, those that are justice impacted. So we've been working, in that area. And again, a lot of these bills are tied in. The most recent one we put out is we call the Crisis Stabilization and Community Reentry Act. So this bill is letting our mental health providers partner with those that are incarcerated and our returning citizens. So we've got to create a warm handoff. We can't just say, here's $25 and a bus ticket. I mean, that's just insane. And that's why we have 75% recidivism, and we spend $80 billion a year on prisons when all that money should be paid forward in the job training, forward into mental health assistance, forward into MAT for helping with, drug dependence. So we've got to spend money differently and think long-term. In my business background, it was always about investing for the long term and not just solving the problem, the fire today. Let's look at how the fire got started and let's get in front of this. And so that's what we've been trying to do and think about that. But we've also got to get transparency about what's happening with COVID right now, in our prisons and jails. And I've met with the folk from the Bureau of Prisons, and I've talked to the Biden administration about this. And we need to really do a 180 because no one there is thinking about great prison reform. We've had some very direct conversation with the Biden team about this. And we just need new leadership that's about outcomes and it's about metrics. We've got to measure what's happening, and nobody in the Bureau of Prisons, and of course, most folks who are in state prisons, I know, but we may as well start with the federal prison system, and then we can find best practices and move it down to the states.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think that this idea of looking at policies to see their return on investment, as opposed to just purely looking at costs, is a very smart way to look at things. And I think not the way that most people look at things when it comes to the justice system. So yeah, that's great. So I want to pivot a little bit to a slightly different topic in criminal justice reform. So as you mentioned about the pandemic and all of its after effects, the pandemic has been particularly damaging to small businesses. And as someone who started your own business, you very much understand what these businesses are facing. And thankfully, Congress was able to provide support under the CARES Act with the Paycheck Protection Program. However, many businesses have been restricted from accessing these funds because of a criminal record. Can you tell us a bit more about how this harms people returning to their communities and what you're doing to help?
Yeah, it's government, as you said, being myopic, just looking inward and thinking about today. And we really got to just change the mindset that we're thinking about how we're going to help people and really make a difference in their lives and then measure it. We got to measure these outcomes. And that's something that they don't really get here in Washington. One of my constituents, Mark Wilkes, a wonderful gentleman who had a real tough life of crime, paid his dues, came out, a returning citizen. Now he's a wonderful advocate to help our returning citizens, create new lives. And he's a perfect example of what second chances are so important. So Mark owns a corner store in Hagerstown, and I got to know him. We've been up the store many times. He's a fellow entrepreneur like me. He's a wonderful, gregarious, outgoing man. And he went for a loan with the PPP during COVID, and he was denied because he was a returning citizen. So with Mark, we went to bat to the Small Business Administration and said, hey, this just isn't right. I mean, this man has paid his price. He made a mistake. Let's move on. And they agreed. But it took a little while, and they changed their qualifications. But Congress didn't put that in. That was the SBA made up their own policy. But once we're able to intervene and say, that's not who America is. America is about second chances. And they didn't get it, but they came around. So, we've got to make sure that those are no longer incarcerated, that we've got to be supporting their success in society. And if we do that, we all win. Everybody moves forward together.
Yeah, thank you. So as my last topic, I want to talk a little bit about the future and looking forward. So looking forward into 2021, I'd love to hear from you what you see as being next for bipartisan criminal justice reform in this Congress. What are your priorities moving forward, and where do you really see the opportunities specifically on trying to move through things that are bipartisan over the next year?
Yeah, no, and just to loop back about the challenges that these returning citizens have that just so wrong. We had Mark also, right now, we have a new bill which we're fighting for to get Mark to be able to take SNAP money. So a lot of folks, they have SNAP dollars, but because he's a returning citizen, the government says you can't serve those customers. I mean, again, it's just an injustice. So we're working with Mark now. We're writing new legislation on that. And, incarcerated voters, voting. We've all known about that. We worked with the ACLU last year and helping the Florida situation on voter suppression. So these returning citizens have got to get their rights, the same rights you and I have. But what's up for next year? I'm excited about this year. I'm disappointed that we don't have the Senate. I felt very comfortable there. We could get a real lot done, but criminal justice reform should and always should be bipartisan. I mean, there's no question. We had the Koch brothers working on our plan with the ACLU because they realize people have paid a price. They're an integral part of our workforce. We got 2.3 million people incarcerated right now, and they're coming out. 95% are going to come out. So let's make their life successful. And that'll save us a lot of dollars at the end of the day. But again, to your point, we got to spend those dollars up front to help them train and reacclimate with a warm handoff, have the mental health support, have the addiction support. So the first step back was a nice step forward, but that's all it was. I call it criminal justice light. We need a really big second step act. So we've been putting together a plan. We've been working on it since last May. We've talked to all the justice impact groups. We've worked with the House, the Senate, bipartisan, and all the leaders in this area. And, we've got to attack first, making the First Step Act retroactive. I mean, hello, that they can't have two sets of rules for folks that did something before, then it's changed for those that are here now. So that seems like a complete no-brainer. We've got to address 3 strikes, you're out. We've got to address mandatory minimums. We've got to address life without parole. And we've got to address prison reform. I mean, the death penalty. ACLU, we litigated that out last year in Washington State. That has to go away. And we've got to, work on metrics of the Bureau of Prisons to get longitudinal studies so we can really judge outcomes. And things like solitary confinement has to go away. So we've been working with the Biden team for the last couple of months. They're policy folks. So we all got together a game plan, and hopefully Kamala can, take the lead on this. I've spoken to her directly about this, and it would be awesome, if we had Kamala Harris really drive this over the finish line, and we could really we could attack the systemic racism that we have here in America. So I'm excited about it. And I think there's an awful lot that can be done, and we can make real progress, but it's going to have to be bipartisan, obviously.
Absolutely. No, that agenda sounds very exciting. And we at the Justice Action Network will really be trying to push forward a lot of these priorities into 2021 and the upcoming years. So that's really exciting to hear. I mean, I completely agree with you that any justice reform has to be bipartisan, and that there is a lot of momentum and a lot of opportunity in Washington. So if you don't mind, I will actually throw in one additional question before we close. Can you tell us why you are invested in the topic of criminal justice reform, and just generally why that is something that you have spent so much of your time on across the board on all of these different bills?
Yeah, absolutely. And, my involvement here is personal. I'm an entrepreneur. I started my business back when I was at the Wharton School of Business. And, I started with zero. My dad went bankrupt. We had a farm and, started over. But my business now is in 27 states. I've got 10,000, team members. But we've tried to be emblematic of what business should do to be part of it. And we've hired over 500 returning citizens. So guess what? We got a 14% better retention rate. So you can do the right thing and do it better for your business. So we've tried to be a voice with big business to say, let's step up. My vision is we need folks in industry, at Walmart, at retail, at distribution, all kinds of entry-level jobs to be recruiting right at our jails themselves when folks come out of incarceration. We got to train them first, get them ready for the job. So when you come out of grad school, you're getting trained, you're getting recruited, and then you go back to your hometown and pick up a job and move from there. But my entry early on to the criminal justice system was a very abrupt entry, and then I was actually arrested 3 times, arrested by a very corrupt attorney general in Pennsylvania. They arrested my wife, my younger brother, to put pressure on me. And, I was able to fight back and succeed. But I fought back and was successful because I'm educated. I had enough dollars to hire some good lawyers, and also, frankly, I'm white. So I got three big advantages that so many folks in our criminal justice system do not have. So at that point, my wife and I said, this easily could have gone the wrong way for us. We could have easily just taken a plea and made it go away. But instead, because we had the education, the financial wherewithal, and quite frankly, the skin color, we said, we're going to fight this. And we were successful and have gone on to create, jobs all over the country. And so that's why the ACLU is, one of my most important philanthropic efforts that we've worked with. We set up the Trone Center for Justice and Equality in New York City in 2015. And, this is something that I'm just completely immersed and invested in. And I think it helps to have a different type of leader in this, that's a business leader that says, yeah, these folks need a second chance. And that's good, but it also can be good for business too. So we've got to get the business community involved in solutions and not just, saying folks made a mistake and you pay for it, the rest of your life. So we're going to work hard to push the needle on this in Congress. I'm 1000% committed to it. I'm extremely passionate about it. And we love to have your assistance and help. And it's been great to have that. So thank you all so much.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for sharing that. I mean, I think that the perspective that you bring to this work is really unique and very, very needed. So thank you for all of your work. And thank you so much for your time and for your continued leadership on criminal justice reform. It's been a pleasure speaking with you, and we are incredibly excited to see what the new year brings for bipartisan criminal justice reform and for you. And we are looking forward to continuing to work with you as well. So thank you. And thank you to all of our viewers for tuning in to this installment of Unconventional.
Thanks again. Appreciate it. Let's continue to be a voice for the voiceless.